Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alexander Arefiev. I am press attaché of the Russian Embassy in South Africa, and this is Alternative Viewpoint video series. On 24th February 2022, Russia, being left with no other option to protect the people of Donbass from constant violence emanating from the Kiev regime, as well as to tackle the strategic security threats to Russia, had to launch the special military operation in Ukraine for the purpose of its demilitarization and denazification. A year ago, Russia came to stop the war against the people of eastern Ukraine, launched by the Kiev regime and inspired by the West through its financial, military and political support. Today, we would like to explore the role of the West in tragedy of Ukraine. Since the Western elites no longer even try to make a secret that they have been pushing and preparing Ukraine for armed conflict, and yes, pushing the country to fight People's Republics of Donetsk and Lugansk, and ultimately Russia, it is only logical to try and analyze when and where did the West enter the labyrinth of lies, once created with its own hands. A quick side note: when one is constantly telling lies to others, they often end up believing in their own lies. Lies are very addictive drugs, and we can say that because the West gave us a great demonstration to that statement. Let us begin our journey from 1991, from the day when the Soviet Union collapsed. Back then, Washington declared itself the winner in the Cold War and started vigorously building Pax Americana, a unipolar world with US in the lead. A weakened Russia, busy with its domestic problems, searching for its place in the new political reality, was not regarded as a rival by the US elites. In line with this, the Western propaganda tried its hardest to convince the Russians that our country will be forever lagging behind the civilized and sophisticated West, and thus must always remain in the position of an obedient and timid student whose only objective was to do as being told, even if it meant abandoning its own culture, values, identity, national interests and pride. But as we said earlier, lies are just like sanctions, a double-edged sword. The collective West apparently got mesmerized by its own propaganda. That was the moment when the West has entered the labyrinth of lies. Since 1991, it has been fostering its sense of impunity and hunger for unlimited power. It convinced itself that it could do whatever it wanted and that the world became the playground where it is free to conduct its insane geopolitical experiments. That state of collective West mentality is what led to rapid expansion of NATO, which is above all an instrument of Washington's control over Europe, despite Russia's years-long warnings against doing so. But if Russia is said to be weak, why even bother taking its interests and concerns into account? Or anyone else's? Hence the tragedies of 1999 when NATO destroyed Yugoslavia, 2003 when US invaded Iraq claiming lives of 1 million civilians, 2011 when NATO destroyed Libya, ruining this country's statehood, 2014 when US and its allies intervened in Syria, basically siding with Al-Qaeda. At the same time, the US was inciting and financing civil disorder and color revolutions across the globe. This brings us to 2014, to unconstitutional coup in Kiev, to those few days in February 2014 when Germany, France and Poland supported the trampling of agreement of transfer of power by the Ukrainian opposition. The agreement, the implementation of which they guaranteed literally on the previous day. This coup in Kiev became the trigger for civil war in Ukraine. In 2014, the Western propaganda machine tried to convince its audience that the unconstitutional coup in Kiev was a manifestation of Ukrainian people's strive for freedom and democracy. No, it wasn't. It was a coup. Nothing more and nothing less, and the West knew that from the very beginning. But that coup served the interests of EU and US by turning Ukraine into an obedient tool against Russia, so Western elites regarded that coup as democratic. Back then, the West was still under the illusion that Russia was weak and unable to defend itself, and so Ukraine, regardless of its strong ties to Russia, could be taken into the Western sphere of influence. This decision led to a destructive civil war in Ukraine that took lives of thousands of innocent people. But when was the last time when the West actually cared about anything but securing its own dominance? When Russia said that genocide of Russians in Donbass must be stopped, the West just shrugged it off. German Chancellor Scholz in 2022 described those claims as ridiculous. When Russia said that the Ukrainian crisis must be resolved diplomatically and supported the Minsk agreements, the very instrument that guaranteed Ukraine's territorial integrity, mind you, well, the West just used this time to pump Ukraine with weapons. As a reminder, this is what Germany's ex-Chancellor Angela Merkel said. The 2014 Minsk agreement was an attempt to give time to Ukraine. It also used this time to become stronger, as can be seen today. The Ukraine of 2014-2015 is not the modern Ukraine. Ex-President of France, François Hollande, said basically the same. Since 2014, Ukraine has strengthened its military posture. Indeed, the Ukrainian army was completely different from that of 2014. It was better trained and equipped. It is the merit of the Minsk agreements to have given the Ukrainian army this opportunity. There are also quotes to the same effect by the ex-Prime Minister of UK, Boris Johnson, and the then Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko. You can easily find those yourselves on the internet. The Minsk agreements were painfully negotiated at the highest level, contracting parties being Ukraine and Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, with Russian, German and French leaders as intermediaries. Belarus was the host country. Minsk agreements were approved by the UN Security Council. Note that some time ago West introduced a package of sanctions against our country for not fulfilling the Minsk agreements. And that was in the face of the fact that Russia had never been a side to Minsk agreements, hence never had obligations under it. Yet Russia supported those agreements till the very end. In fact, Russia was the only country to do so, while the West was lying, again, thus walking further into the labyrinth of lies. In December 2021, Russia presented the draft agreements on mutual security measures, yet another attempt to resolve the Ukrainian crisis diplomatically. It was this very last-minute diplomatic effort, so dear to those who like to put the blame on Russia for not having exhausted every diplomatic mean before resorting to force. What did we receive in response to our proposal? More arrogance, more disrespect to our position, and more Western exceptionalism. Here is how Russian President Vladimir Putin described all this while addressing the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation on 21st of February 2023.
В декабре 2021 года мы официально направили в США и НАТО проекты договоров о гарантиях безопасности. Но по всем ключевым, принципиальным для нас позициям получили, по сути дела, прямой отказ. Тогда окончательно стало понятно, что отмашка на реализацию агрессивных планов дана, и останавливаться уже они не собираются. Угроза нарастала, причем с каждым днем. Поступающая информация не оставляла сомнений, что к февралю 2022 года все было готово для очередной кровавой карательной акции на Донбассе, против которого, напомню, киевский режим еще в 2014 году бросил и артиллерию, и танки, и самолеты.
So, judging by the fate that the Minsk agreement and the draft agreements on security measures have suffered, it is safe to say that the West has undermined every single diplomatic initiative to resolve the Ukrainian crisis. And if you're about to argue that the EU, US and NATO have only done so because those proposals were coming from Russia, think this. Chinese position on the political settlement of the Ukrainian crisis, published on 24th February 2023, have also been heavily criticized by the West. Western elites are way into the labyrinth of lies, seeing themselves as masters of the world who are free to bend everyone and everything to their will. The West is convinced that it is destined to rule the world. The West is convinced that it can make its every wish, no matter how twisted and distorted it is, come true in a snap of a finger. It has been brewing in this distorted perception for decades and got too addicted to this. And the current events in Ukraine prove that. Finally, we made it to February 2023. The West last year was trying to convince everyone that Russia was defeated economically, defeated militarily, and left alone with its reputation destroyed. Something that usually happens when one is spreading lies happened. The West believed in its own propaganda. The West had no doubt that Russia will fall swiftly under sanctions pressure, and it seemed it had no backup plan. Now the Western politicians are saying that sanctions need time to take effect, but let us remind you that Russian economy has been left in tatters back in 2015, as the then President of USA, Barack Obama, said. Was President Obama lying back then? Apparently, yes. Yet another lie coming from the West. Why we're not surprised? So the EU and USA are left with no choice but to keep on inventing sanctions. They went too deep into the labyrinth of lies, so at this point they have to keep lying. They have to keep lying that Ukraine is winning, they have to keep lying that sanctions are effective, they have to keep lying that Russia is weak and will crumble any moment and is desperately looking for an off-ramp. Just another effort from the Western side, just a little more assistance to Ukraine and Russia will fall. The reality check for the West is near. The fact is, some more realistically thinking people in the West have already started discussing a way out of the Ukrainian crisis. The West has already started looking to disengage without losing its face. It's not Russia, it's the West that needs an off-ramp because this crisis is of its making. EU economy is suffering heavily and EU leaders would love this all to end, but they cannot back down, they're in too deep. The labyrinth of lies won't let one go that easily. And the further they walk into the labyrinth, the harder it becomes for them to escape. Western arrogance, sense of impunity and self-righteousness, greed and lust for power are waiting for them in the labyrinth like a minotaur. The more pressure the Western elites put on Russia, the harder it will be for them to negotiate with Moscow in the future. The more the West clings to the unipolar, so-called rules-based world order, the harder it will be to find a place in the multipolar world. We guess this is what we can learn from the West here. Lies perhaps can get you far, but they can't keep you going forever. That is all for today. My name is Alexander Arefyev, I am press attaché of the Russian Embassy in South Africa, and this was Alternative Viewpoint video series. Stay tuned, stay safe.